Stuart Petrie, one of the environmental health officers, and Alan Irving over there, who I think you met as you were being greeted at the door, one of our team leaders. Thank you for coming tonight. This is the start of our consultation process on this proposed piece of legislation. I'm saying proposed because, as you're probably aware, in Jersey we draft the legislation, we have a consultation around it, provide comments back to our law drafting colleagues, and then when we think the draft is ready for lodging, it will be passed back to the Minister for Health and Social Services, and then it will proceed through the normal states processes. So it would be lodged with the states and it would be debated. But prior to that happening, it's always very useful for us to have a conversation with the people that the legislation might affect. And in this case, the Public Health and Safety Dwellings Jersey law affects everybody basically, anybody who lives in a house. So it can affect everyone. Naturally, there are areas of our work that we prioritise because of the nature of the situation that we're dealing with housing conditions. This piece of work has been developed probably over the last 4 or 5 years with colleagues in the Housing Department, the Population Office, and also with a lot of other colleagues that we work with, like the fire officers and other services within the states. Social security, that kind of thing. And essentially there's a comprehensive approach being developed to housing, and I know Andrew's here tonight, the Housing Minister. What we're trying to do is have a very comprehensive approach to housing in general, and this piece of legislation is just a part of that big jigsaw really. And the Health Protection Service is involved in this particular part of it because the work that we do is around housing conditions and how those conditions can affect the health and well-being of the people that live in those houses. What we want to do tonight is just to share with you a little bit of information about what we're trying to do. As I said, there's a much bigger housing picture going on, but this is just a small part really about the health and safety of dwellings and the impacts on human health. What we want to do is, I'll just run through a very brief introduction and then I'll hand over to my colleague Stuart Petrie, who will run through some slides and show you some pictures of houses that we've actually been in this year. So they're very current photographs of the types of properties that the Health Protection Service gets involved in. Over the years that I've worked in Jersey, I've visited a lot of properties, and sometimes the conditions have been very, very poor, and there certainly would be very detrimental to the health and well-being of the residents in those properties. There is also some very good housing in Jersey, and we're not trying to say that all houses are poor, because they're not. There's some very, very good quality housing, and we want to be very supportive of the people who have good housing, and especially for the landlords who rent out good quality housing. We're very supportive to try and ensure there's a level playing field for them, so that the poorer quality houses are actually brought up to the same kinds of standards. This proposal is really hoping to bring forward some new standards in Jersey that are bespoke to the Jersey situation. There have been many conversations between myself and the Health Minister, and also there's been conversations with the Housing Minister and colleagues across the departments, where we've talked together about what we really want to try to achieve with this. As I say, we want to be supportive. We want to support the people who have good housing to offer people. We want to support people who maybe are being discharged from hospital and they're having difficulty, even if they're owner-occupiers, and they feel that they need some support to ensure that the house they're going home to isn't going to have a detrimental effect on their health as they're released from hospital. This isn't just about bad landlords. This is a completely holistic approach to housing conditions, and what can we do to support the improvement of housing so that everybody in Jersey has a decent house to live in. I'll start first of all, and as I say, I've thanked you and welcomed you for coming, and we've made our introductions already. What we want to do tonight is to describe a little bit more about what the proposed law says. We want to explain to you what we think the hazards to health are, because this law talks about health and safety in dwellings, and it talks about hazards. And there are different types of hazards, so we want to maybe mention a little bit about what these different hazards actually are. How we would actually carry out inspections, because what this law will do is introduce a new inspection regime. As I said, we've looked at inspection systems in lots of different jurisdictions. We've looked at a system that's used in England at the moment, but what we've done is we've adapted that to make it suitable for the Jersey context, because obviously our housing market, our situation locally is quite different to what you would find in a big city, say Birmingham or in the middle of London. We've got to make sure that whatever we do is appropriate for the local Jersey situation. There will be an enforcement regime, but as I said, the first line of enforcement is always to support and advise and to assist people for self-compliance. And enforcement is always a last resort, where if we get to the point where we can't secure improvements, then there will be sanctions, and as the draft legislation, I think you've all got copies of it, says, there will be the opportunities for environmental health officers to serve notices to require improvements to be carried out. We do have some powers already to do that, but the powers we have at the moment are relying on very old, out-of-date legislation, and what we want to do is modernise it and bring it into a modern housing context, where we can look at health and well-being and the quality of life issues, as well as just some physical disrepair issues. We want to ensure that there are advantages for landlords and tenants. This isn't just about protecting one sector or the other. This is about supporting everybody so that everyone in Jersey can live in a decent house, and we can support everybody to achieving that. And then at the end of the session, we'll hopefully take some questions from you. There are some post-it notes at the back of the hall on the table there, and we'd be really grateful if anybody wants to make a few comments tonight about what they've heard. We'd be really pleased either for you to write it on a piece of paper, or you can use the post-it notes and stick them up on the presentation boards at the back there. And all of it will obviously be confidential, but as the consultation goes on, anybody is welcome to send us a written letter to say, this is what we think about it, I've had time to think about it, we've heard the presentation, this is what we think now. And as I say, the actual closing date is the 30th of April, so there's plenty of time for people to comment. We know from huge bodies of evidence that poor housing conditions can cause problems for both physical health, social and mental health and well-being. We know that for over centuries there's been evidence gathered about the kinds of conditions that affect people, and I suppose for most of you in the room, you know, it's quite obvious that if somebody lives in a cold, damp house, then if you've got bronchitis or asthma, then it's likely to affect your health and well-being and exacerbate the conditions that you might have. So, and there's a massive body of evidence around the kinds of things, these conditions, that can actually affect your health. And we'll talk about some of those as we progress through the presentation. So the key principle of this proposed law, it's up on the screen there, is that any residential premises should provide a safe and healthy environment for any potential occupier. And if this law is passed, it will introduce minimum health and safety standards with respect to all dwellings and provide an enforcement mechanism through which inspectors could issue notices, for example, and require action. But as I've already said, the first line is always to support and help people and assist to ensure self-compliance. And obviously the proposed law applies to all dwellings, as we've mentioned. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Stuart, and he's going to run through some of the technical issues with you about the hazards to health and how the inspection system works.
Good evening. Hopefully you all have nice dwellings to live in. I've spent the last many years of my life in dwellings that most of us probably wouldn't want to stay in, apart from my own home, of course. Examples of hazards to health. The things that we're talking about that can cause problems for people's health. Falls on stairs. Clearly, it's fairly steep, no handrails. You can imagine a 70 or 80-year-old lady falling down there and damaging herself. Clearly that's a problem for her, but it's also a problem for the state. To make that right would probably cost £400, £500 if Jersey prices. about £4.50 in Yorkshire where I come from. But the cost of somebody with a broken hip being picked up by the ambulance service, taken in, getting ready for an operation, having a hip replacement, convalescing, going back and still having the works done, is tens of thousands of pounds. The last estimate I had from the UK was over 48,000, and that's if everything goes swiftly. So clearly there's a benefit to everybody to make sure that whoever gets that right in the first place. Damp and mould growth, and these are genuine pictures, you wouldn't want to be living in there with your food being stored near there. Actually, if that was in the bedroom of a baby, it would be far worse. Evidence shows that babies who are exposed to damp and mould growth in their bedroom, near their bed head or their cot head, because they're in there for many hours, even when they're taken out of there, it can be 4 or 5 years before they get over the problems. And it causes asthma problems, it causes psychological problems with them going, the clothes smell, so they're called smelly at school, so they don't want to go to school. They're off less often, they achieve less well at school, and you get a cycle of deprivation. Some great work by Shelter, if you're interested in researching that, called Life Chance. Carbon monoxide poisoning. So, yes, get your gas safety checks done. And carbon monoxide doesn't just come from gas, it comes from oil, it comes from solid fuel. More deaths pro rata in the UK from carbon monoxide from solid fuel than from gas. And we're beginning to see them now for when people put log burners, because they're very trendy, but the flues aren't put in right, they're not checked, and people die. I was talking to the fire service yesterday. They had a fire caused by somebody putting their own flue, just straight up through the ceiling, through the floor, and strange enough, it was hot and it set fire to the floor upstairs. So there are all sorts of issues about that. I have issues with this respect to handling asbestos without any protective gloves. But again, if we've got asbestos and it's friable, it's breaking up, it can be hazardous to health. And my part of the world in Yorkshire, we've got hundreds, if not thousands of people still fighting the company from asbestosis, from an asbestos factory. Crowding the space, we won't want to sleep in there. Do we find things like that? Yes, we do. You need enough space. And we've got damp in there, and we've got problems there. Domestic hygiene, try cleaning that floor. These are not exaggerations, these are what we come across. Falls on stairs, our little old ladies struggle getting out of there, and the new law, for the first time, would let us help us to include the yards, the steps up from the road, from the pavement, and the outside spaces are there. If they've got a shed, that needs to be safe as well. There's no point keeping them safe in their house and they go and die in the shed. Food safety. Fancy rolling out your pastry on that? So, you might think this is all exaggerations, they've picked the best out of the library. I can assure you we haven't. We wouldn't dare show some of them. So we looked at things that we found in Jersey this year. Not this month, it was in February, I think. So, problem with the sanitation. That bucket isn't there to flush the toilet, that's because there's a hole in the roof as well. These were rats trying to get out, not trying to get in. They'd eaten through the electric system and shut that off, so there was no hot water, which was electric, there was no heating, the lighting didn't work, and there were rat droppings everywhere. A few problems with things collapsing in the ceiling. It's fairly strange, this bucket of water, this bath of water, was collecting drips, but it was so hot in there with the south-facing window that it evaporated, and we don't think it actually overflowed very often. A bit of a splash there, but so we see two problems. Far too hot in the summer, you'd poach if you were in there. Three problems. Far too cold in the winter, and clearly the structure of the place isn't too good. We come across this often. Somebody's had a cheap job done, the DPC has been breached, we're going to get rising damp in there, and the ventilation being painted over. More dampness. This isn't condensation, this was coming down the corner, it was penetrating damp, and if you'd gone outside you could see why. You could see what was happening on the outside. There's a lovely green line pointing to it. So there are lots of problems that we're picking up every day One of my colleagues only today photographed somewhere where there were mushrooms growing on the carpet. And we have those photographs as well. So, what do we want? Well, as professionals, what we want, and I think what Jersey probably needs, is a vibrant, well-managed private rented sector. We couldn't do without the private rented sector. Where the stock's in good condition, it meets modern standards of amenity and safety, and that stock should be acceptable to the host community, so we've not got people saying, those people over there. It should be desirable to the tenants and give a fair return to the landlords. And I don't think there's anything contentious there. That's what the law is trying to get. So how would we inspect? Well, as we would inspect now, with the same people doing the same sort of job. The JEP suggested we'd have a new inspectorate. Well, that's not going to happen. It's going to be the same people within the same budget, just doing it with a slightly different approach. Inspections will be triggered as they are now as a result of a complaint from a tenant or a referral. And we have about 18 different partner organisations that refer to us. If the fire service finds something of concern, if the GP thinks that children are coming in with too many asthmas, he'll ask us to take a look at the house to see if there's mould growth. If the CAB gets somebody coming in, we'll have a look at that as well. Inspection will be guided by the Public Health Housing Rating System, which we'll get to shortly. But it does take account of the person that's living in there. We understand that people sometimes aren't the best of tenants. We understand that they themselves don't understand how the heating system works, or you need to heat and ventilate to prevent condensation. And we wouldn't be allowed by the law to take action against a landlord if it's the tenant that's causing the problem. Of course we wouldn't. We would give advice to the tenant, we'd help them with advice on how to clean up mould if it was caused by that. We would hopefully solve it in a different way. But we're there to help the tenant, and in that case we'd help the landlord, because it doesn't do a landlord any good if his property is wringing wet because people aren't living in it to the best advantage of both. The Public Health Housing Rating System I could probably talk about for a week, but I shan't. It's evidence-based, and like all professions, we're working on an evidence-based basis, based on a huge amount of evidence. Essentially what they did was they interviewed everybody that went into accident, emergency and GP surgeries with injuries and near misses to find out what caused it, and they analysed that over 2 years, so it's a huge amount of data. And that came up with the 29 best hazards, if you like, it could be a television programme, 29 biggest hazards that caused illness or death. Those hazards go from radon, in terms of radiation, dampness, excess cold if the property isn't capable of being heated up, if the heating system isn't up to scratch, falls on stairs, falls in the bath, falls between levels if the windows haven't got a suitable catch on them and a child's likely to go sailing through the window, electrocution, scalds, there are 29 of them. And the approach is risk-based and property-specific. So we will be looking at each property in its own merit to make sure it was safe for any potential tenant, any potential visitor, and to make sure it's also safe to passers-by. We don't want explosions killing people as they're walking past. It's an objective assessment. It's challengeable. If somebody wanted to challenge us, clearly they could have somebody who was also used to the same system, and there could be a debate. We could talk about it. Well, I think this because of that, and there is room for debate. And it applies to all dwellings. If your permanent dwelling was a tent, it would apply to the tent. I suspect that might be excess cold. Lack of ventilation? I don't know, maybe too much ventilation. So how would we seek to apply the new powers if indeed the law is passed? Firstly, we want to work with landlords. Experience in other jurisdictions suggests that in less than 1% of the cases do you ever need to go to enforcement. Even now, a lot of the time, we'll talk to a landlord and he'll say, first I've heard of it, and we'll put it right now. Sometimes the tenant doesn't want to go to the landlord, sometimes they come to us for whatever reason, and that dialogue has to start. We're happy to support the landlord. It's not fix it now, it's how reasonably can we have a timetable to put these things right. If it's electrocution because there are live wires around, that's a pretty much now. If it needs some improvement to the roof, which needs fine weather and quotations and working out, that's fine. Talk to us, let's agree a timetable so that over time we get the place up to standard. Proportionate regulatory policy, well, we hope we've got that anyway. Reasonable and consistent, of course. Clearly, if we've got landlords who are less responsible, who are less responsive, we're going to spend more time with them because they're going to need more time. What we really want is, good afternoon, Mr. Landlord, there's an issue there. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Stuart, we'll put it right tomorrow. Yeah, nirvana, that may not happen. We work collaboratively with other partners, as I said, fire, police, GPs, charities are all referring. What's the impact on landlords and agents going to be? Well, there'll be a level playing field. Quite often we're told, have you seen the guy down the road with the state of his place? We say, no, but give us an address, we'll go sort it out. We want the landlords to be able to compete to a level standard and not have people, the good landlords, thinking that other people are getting away with anything. You'd be working with a named officer, it wouldn't be some nameless bureaucrat. You'd know who you were dealing with. You could ring them up and say, John this or Steve that. Written unambiguous standards, you know what we would expect, and we would agree that, and we would put it in writing. And obviously access to advice, because we've probably seen similar problems many times before. We might have a good idea of how to put it right. And of course we're happy to help. The result of that is you have nice homes that people are eager to rent, and they become more profitable tenancies. And your property is less likely to deteriorate because we've pointed out things that not only are happening now, but will happen next year or the year after because we can see the signs. What about tenants? Well, improved standards. Safer properties, safer for everybody, for the youngsters and for the old people and those of us that are still in between. Control of the very few rogue landlords that we have to make sure that they do put things right. Reduce fuel costs through better insulation and more efficient heating systems. There's a big debate about that, whether that would cure fuel poverty. It probably wouldn't. It would probably mean people would still be in fuel poverty, but their properties will be warmer, safer and healthier. And that's a different debate for a different forum. Depends how far into fuel poverty you are as to whether it will lift you out or not. But certainly we see a lot of cases where heating is either inadequate or people just haven't been told how to use it. They're not aware of which electrical supply system they're on. Is it economy 7 or 10, or is it any of the other strange things you have on Jersey? Me, I've got panels on my roof in Yorkshire. So, what's the impact on the housing stock? Improved standards of rented property, safer property, and we're hoping to get an incremental improvement in the standard housing stock by improving the less good properties. We bring them up towards the average is going to go up. And it's not an instant fix, it's a long-term fix over time. As a result of this, we're hoping to have better maintained property, which again will benefit both landlord and tenant and help with the improving stock. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. So that just gives you sort of a brief insight into what the new proposed legislation includes. As I said earlier, the whole process that we're in now is subject to the usual political process. And obviously once we get public feedback and feedback from anybody who wants to contribute, actually I've got the Chief Fire Officer in touch with us already today to say that we had a meeting yesterday but we really want to give you some written comments, so that's fantastic. Anybody can take part in the consultation. And naturally, we want the replies to come to the Health Protection Service at our offices in Mason and the Path on the Parade there, and that to be done by the 30th of April, as we mentioned. So thank you for your attention. What we thought we would do is just give you a snapshot this evening, and then of what we're trying to include in this part of the housing jigsaw, and then really throw it over to you to see what kind of comments you've got. If you would like to make comments in open forum, we're very happy to take questions and take comments from you, or indeed there are post-its and paper at the back for you to leave written comments if you don't want to speak openly, because I do know some people are quite nervous about taking part in a sort of an open debate. But it's over to you now, really. What do you think about the proposals for us to start to try to improve health and wellbeing through improvements in housing? Please, the gentleman there.
It's probably about